Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are in the world watching us today. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name is David Heafitz. I am a Vice President of Mobile and Web Application Development at Prudential Financial in Newark, New Jersey in the US. I'm very excited to be asked to have the opportunity today to moderate a panel on digital accessibility and voice. I want to just call out a couple of things as we get going. This is a pre-recorded panel. Today is actually Thursday, June 4th. These are very challenging times here in the U.S. We are seeing the social challenges behind racial inequities and injustice making themselves known on top of the crisis we're already facing with COVID and economic disparity in the country and in the world for that matter. So we wanted to make sure that everyone is aware that today's topic is digital accessibility. And we understand that accessibility is a topic for people of all backgrounds. And we feel very strongly that voice in particular is a technology that offers a medium for change, for opportunity, for equality. And we intend to address that in some of our comments today. I've asked each of the panelists to reflect that in their responses to the question I've asked. And we will spend some time at the end of the panel focusing particularly on the current issue and how the correlation we see between the work we do in digital accessibility and the social issues of the day. I'm joined today by panelist Carissa Merrill. Carissa is an experienced architect at US Bank, responsible for accessibility and inclusive design. She has a background in this field and has been working on it for the majority of her career and brings a great deal of experience and wealth of knowledge on the design aspect, not only in voice, but in other platforms and other mediums. Brook McCall. Brook is the director of the Tech Access Initiative at the United Spinal. Brook also brings a great wealth of knowledge and background in terms of accessibility. And finally, Thomas Chappell, who works with me at Prudential. Thomas is an analyst in our data technology solutions group. And Thomas joined us in Prudential about 2 years ago as a graduate of the National Technical Institute of the Deaf. Thomas is deaf and yet is a fully qualified developer and an ongoing active contributor at Prudential. And we'll talk about his experiences as an employee and how he assesses and evaluates accessibility tools in addition to his regular work. To start, in your introduction in the work you're doing, could you talk about what's the most exciting thing in voice design that you're doing yourself as it applies to accessibility? And also, what's the most exciting thing you're seeing in the industry, in the space of voice for accessibility? So Carissa, if you could open up with that, we'd love to hear from you first.
Sure. So I will say the coolest thing that I think we're working on with voice and accessibility at US Bank is we are really building up and ramping up our inclusive research and usability testing practices. So our voice team has been really proactive in bringing people in with people with backgrounds that have like blind, low vision, cognitive considerations, physical and hearing considerations into our usability testing. And that's been incredibly beneficial just so that we can incorporate those findings and that feedback to really design with people in an inclusive mindset, as well as being sensitive to socioeconomic background. So I think like that's something that, I'm incredibly passionate about, our team is incredibly passionate about, and I think it's really exciting and really does make really solid, great products for everyone. Some of the things that I'm really excited about seeing in the marketplace, I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, is basically we really need to be conscious of how things are built and who they're built for in terms of establishing like what the success criteria is, like how we define success in terms of systems. So something that I think is really interesting is how there are different tools to make more robust speech technology, which, as we know, and like you said so greatly, David, is a great equalizer and democratizes information. The thing that I think are really cool are things like Voice It, which is kind of, it maps, you know, atypical speech patterns into making more robust platforms in terms of translating speech to text so that we can leverage those systems that voice is built on. Another one is Verboso, which is gamifying speech therapy. So just like how we can really like meet people where they are and where their interests are, and make you know, kind of like that incentivizing and using like that cognitive science in terms of like making things more engaging, more delightful, and really like expanding that realm, and kind of also the neuromuscular devices. So really anything that can kind of like broaden the scope of how we think of, you know, voice per se, and really like leveraging those technologies. Like those are the things that I'm really, really excited about right now.
Thanks, Carissa. I mean, that's a perfect lead in for Brook on that note. So why don't you pick up right where you left off?
Of course, yeah. I am not a designer myself. With United Spinal Association, my role is really activating the voices of our community. So we are people with disabilities or allies of the community, and I myself am a quadriplegic. I am a higher level injury, so I actually am myself hands-free. Voice has been, what do you want to say? Somewhat of my savior. It has given me so much power over the last 17 years since I lost my ability to, you know, interact with the world using my hands. And with voice, I was able to go back to school, graduate from grad school, and actually have my master's in public health. And that led me to really embracing quality of life. I moved away from just focusing on health. I wanted to help people thrive in all senses of the word, and somehow that ended up, you know, leading me to the tech world. And really, that's been huge. And what I want to do with the program that we are facilitating is make sure that folks with disabilities are thought leaders in this realm. And we have so many insights of, you know, what's going on, what we need, and we want to make sure that gets directly to those of you who are designing and coming up with new tech products and services that allow us to use our voice when sometimes we aren't able to use our hands. I think that's the biggest thing for me that is exciting, is really just how universal some of these voice products are. So many things that are being embraced by the, you know, all of the population are things that have been truly life-changing for myself and others in my community. So I guess, you know, when it comes to environmental controls and virtual assistants, things like that, I would say every little bit that is being developed, things like what Carissa is speaking of. I do have a lot of people in my community who have augmented or have speech that isn't traditional, or their voices are not strong. And the fact that we have folks working on tools for them to elevate their ability to communicate, to share their experiences, and then, you know, like I said, to actually give feedback directly on the work you're doing is something that just thrills me.
Brook, I do want to come back to you in a moment after Thomas introduces himself. It's what's fascinating to me is you talked about voice for 17 years, and it's very easy to think of voice as what we know now as digital assistants. So Thomas, please.
Right. Yeah, it's great that you mentioned voice. Obviously, that word for me has a lot of meaning, because voice itself, I mean, it has the ability to empower others. So, for example, myself as a deaf person, that I don't physically use my voice, but I can still have a voice. So, voice and technology is very important to me because it provides equality, it provides communication access for me. And at Prudential, we do have a technology program called the ADA PT. And that provides, it's a business resource group. So that provides new technology for people, and it spreads out to other areas, to other associates. It applies for everybody. So I'm really excited to be working on the two things as well. The AVA, the voice to text feature, automatic captionings, which I use all the time for meetings. I can use technology. For example, I can do a call in to a conference, and I can do an apply in for Zoom. It applies for WebEx and Enterprise Excel. So AVA, it helps me to disconnect with everything, to connect everything from Prudential. So for example, if I can have that anywhere. So I could use, for example, I could use services at any time, and I don't have to do something like I don't have to make a request for them. The second thing would be the ARIA or ERA. That's for low vision technology. For example, a person would connect their phone to an app that they could use as a video. So they can record something and that would connect to you as well, to a live interpreter or a translator. So that interpreter would then see what the background is. They could see the environment through the video. And then a person who is blind or has low vision needs would be able to take advantage of that service and have things explained to them. So for voice technology, it's the one thing that I'm looking forward to because it seems very simple, but there's another company I'm talking about called C-Sound. And there's two people in charge of that, Grayson and Spencer. So for example, it's a plug-in device where you would plug into your wall. And for example, it would hear a voice, it would hear a sound, an environmental noise in your house. And then it would give you a warning on your phone. So for example, if someone's talking or if you hear a faucet dripping, right? Or someone's pushing the doorbell, it's easy to forget. For example, if you leave your faucet on, or if you leave that running, then and you have this plugged in, it would say on your phone, like, hey, there's something going on in your house, and it would give you notifications. So it's kind of watching out for you in that sense.
All three of you mentioned the one word that stuck out to me in each of your three introductions, and I talked about at the open of the panel, was voice as an equalizer, voice as an opportunity. And I'd like to go back on that topic. Brook, earlier you mentioned you've been using voice technologies for 17 years. So in just simple terms, my question for you, the three of you, is why voice and why now? Why is voice the differentiator here that can bring us closer to equity when we have, there's so many technologies out there. There's machine learning, there's cognitive computing is one, there's virtualization. So you can go into mobile technologies, you can go into any number of spaces and fields. But in some ways, voice represents the tip of the spear, and that it correlates those. So could each of you talk about that, and Brook, specifically your experience over these 17 years and how you're seeing that evolution occur and what difference it's made now?
Sure. I can definitely speak to the early days. Right after my accident, I was introduced just to Dragon Naturally Speaking as really my only choice of access to my computer. Prior to my injury, I was in college and very I felt like I was pretty tech savvy and very well connected. I could use IMing and email to interact with friends from across the country. And after my accident, I couldn't even check my email for 3 months. So I was introduced to Dragon Naturally Speaking in a very basic way. My therapist knew of it, but they were definitely not relying on it. And the first time I checked my email, it took me an hour, and I cried because that's how frustrating it was. But when I got back home, I learned because I had to, and I used a mouse grid feature similar to some of the features that we use now that have been, I learned, and it took some time. And like I said, I went back to school, I finished school at UCSD and went to grad school, all using Dragon on my own. I do not like help using the computer. And I've been voice dedicated this whole time. I had early cell phones with magic word dialing, some that were quite frustrating, where I had to have an earbud in my ear and I would be dialing people at random times, and they had no idea that I was calling and leaving messages, and it got awkward at times. And I've seen the evolution, and I've seen how far we've come, and now I can do so many things. And I have other options. I use a mouse. I can use switch control for various platforms, but I am dedicated to voice. I have other friends that have similar abilities that they heckle me. They say, no, you should be using this. And I like voice. It's something that works for me. I love the fact that at this point there's so many options for me and folks in my community. And that's not just people who aren't able to use their hands. That's, folks that it's hard to transfer in and out of bed, so they're able to use environmental controls in their homes where they're not putting themselves at risk from transferring into their wheelchair and risking falls, and just ease of use and safety, where we're able to see our worlds. And like you said, it's a universality that this has rewarded us, and it's an ease.
No, that's a fantastic. I appreciate that, Brooke. Just as it's hard for me to put put myself in someone else's shoes who comes from a different background. I work in the space of accessibility, but I have full use of my arms and legs. So to hear it from your perspective and understand that is very important. I'm sure Carissa will add to that in being responsible for accessibility design and what that means in terms of in architecture. Let me just move over to Thomas for a similar kind of question. Thomas, I mean, what was it like? How has voice changed what you're able to do? I mean, you said that voice technology has given you a voice, but it hasn't been here for your whole life. So tell us the same thing. Why now? What's voice doing for us now?
Yeah, sure. So for me, voice technology, it hasn't been around me. When I was growing up, I didn't have a lot of accessibility to things like that. I would use interpreters, and that was kind of it. Writing back and forth on pieces of paper, trying to gesture with people, things like that. So those are my options before. Once I got into college, voice technology started to kind of take off a little bit. So I would use that more, still periodically though. So now I'm in a position where I could directly use my voice as myself if I would like to, because I could type. I could type my own words, and it would just be a voice for me. Some people do rely on that. For me, voice is more of, it would be an ideal situation. I mean, it's not an ideal situation. It would be something, for example, if I'm in a conference and I don't have an interpreter there, right? I can rely on the voice technology. I could use that. For me, it would be easier to use. For example, if there's something very complicated, really technologically in-depth workshop, something that's difficult to have just any old interpreter do, it would be difficult. If an interpreter's never interpreted that concept before, it could be very challenging. And sometimes you only meet them 5 minutes before the assignment. So if I use a voice to text kind of a technology, it would be easier for me to understand. Captioning as well, that's made a big difference in my life. For socializing, that it applies there too. For example, if I go out to buy food and I'm chatting with someone, voice technology, it's free, it's easy to use. Instead of having an interpreter with me all of the time, it provides me with some more independence. And it does impact our society as well, and the deaf community as well, feeling that independence, feeling like we have options, and having the ability to make a decision that fits you best.
So thank you, Thomas and Brooke. That's fantastic. Carissa, my understanding is this is you design and you consider your architecture with the needs of Brooke and Thomas and many others in mind. So can you talk about how you bring that process forward? How do you take that end state requirement and bring accessibility into the design and architecture process, whether it be voice or other platforms, but in this case, particular voice, and what are some of the key tenets to being able to do that and move the ball forward on accessibility?
So I think circling back to bringing people in and really like moving accessibility and inclusive design practices into the forefront and really starting with that. So really from, what the business line defines as the definition of done, and then having those inclusive practices built out of like really incorporating and building with people of diverse backgrounds and diverse needs. So whether it's different accessibility considerations or different socioeconomic backgrounds, I think it's really important to be cognizant of the diversity as like we build these solutions, and then also having those people involved in the design process, the testing process, and then being very open to feedback, and also being aware of the fact of like how do we define success, because you know, like as we think about all of the content that goes in, all of the visual designs, if we're thinking of a multimodal interface, but content especially as we think of like voice forward technologies, how are we being inclusive to that in terms of like how people speak, you know, keeping things like very simple to understand, which is I think something that we can speak to in the fact that like when we build for accessibility, we're being comprehensive of everyone. So for instance, you know, if we're thinking of cognitive considerations in designing something to be really easy to understand for people with cognitive considerations, that's also really important for people with situational or temporary disabilities. So situational would be something like where we're at with like the COVID situation, and we have like crisis fatigue, and people get, you know, something like tunnel vision. So it's more difficult to make decisions and to process complex information. And so just knowing that as we build accessibility considerations into our processes from, you know, the definition of done from the first set all the way through QE, and making sure that we have good development and semantic practices, it really does create more robust, meaningful solutions that positively impact everyone.
Really succinct and good advice for the community. One thing that came up, so we looked at it in that last sequence, you know, where Thomas talked about, you know, voice technology give him a voice. And Brook, you talked about how it's open to feel, it enabled you to go to grad school. And Carissa, you talked about how you bring that forward into the design process. But how do you really make sure that voice is the great equalizer? How do you take into consideration socioeconomic needs? How do you take into consideration physical accessibility needs? How do you take in cognitive needs? How do you take in anything else that might be on the spectrum in terms of accessibility? It's very broad. And Thomas, you said, and I'll start with you. You gave the keynote at last year's voice conference, and you started with the statement, if you can design for me, you can design for anyone. So maybe you could touch on that. What does it mean to leverage voice as an equalizer? How do you go beyond your own circumstances to make sure that you're reaching out and providing that access that everybody needs?
So I would say, if I could design for me is design for anyone. That means, you know, if you're designing for the general population, and you have to solve issues for myself as well. And if that could be applied to anybody. So for example, if they're already there and they could take advantage of that. So when I'm relating that to social inequality and injustice, from my experience, I helped to teach volunteer in a class as a class assistant at a tech high school in Newark, New Jersey. And we have 13 deaf students there currently. And that's in a mainstream classroom with hearing students as well. And that's already an underserved population. It means they already don't have equal access and opportunities as other people. So they're already underserved. And then on top of that, they already have disability. So they're even more underserved and have even less access. So there's a huge gap there. You know, we need to figure out how we can close that gap. So accessibility, that would be the answer. Not just tech, but in general accessibility as well. More economic opportunities, more experiential opportunities, internship opportunities, educational opportunities. You know, how can we improve their opportunities as a whole so that they can have access to tech? That would be great. You know, and they have from very diverse accessibility needs, and it needs to be individualized to fit several of them. Several of them can use their voice. You know.
Thank you, Thomas. And Brooke, would you like to build on that? I mean, you're an advocate for the United Spinal Association, but it doesn't stop there. So how do you do that in your advocacy work?
Yeah, no, this is just like a topic. Yes, like you said, we could speak for hours on. In my world, in the world of disability, you know, of course, disability does not discriminate in any way. Anyone can have a disability, and many of us at some point in our life will experience a disability. And so it's really important to be mindful. In my work, we really are focused as advocates on all levels, whether that's working towards policy and innovation, and actually trying to advocate legislatively for that, or actually, like I mentioned, a big part of our work is just connecting directly with designers and industry partners that we can leverage our voice and try to mainstream some of these products that can be so impactful in our lives. And like Thomas mentioned, they are the pathway to further employment, employment at all. Many people with disabilities do not see employment as part of their future, and that's completely unnecessary. I think with COVID-19 and the teleworking, life is changing. Our workplaces are going to be changing, and that's going to lead to further opportunities for many with disabilities, and voice is going to play a big role in that. For many, care has been very impacted. So a lot of people who experience paralysis or use wheelchairs and have disabilities rely on outside care, and a lot of that has been limited. And the role of voice products and environmental controls and various technologies have been huge when you can't have someone in your home to help you with some of those small things, like even getting in and out of doors using your voice, or connecting to your computer, or for me, rebooting my computer when I get stuck if there's no one at my home, because the one assistant I have is out running errands or doing what she needs to do. I can do more for myself, and having mainstreaming products and lowering those prices, closing those gaps, and getting people actually the devices to their homes and those technologies to them in a more easy way, in a way that's equitable, is just, it's huge. And I just have to laugh. I don't know if there's someone in the audience who knows. Early on, I was offered a product called Butler in the Box. I guess was an early equivalent to something like your smart speaker that we have in our homes that we can buy, at this point at a very much lower price point, and that is likely going to be relatively plug and play. Excuse me. So having that ease of use where I can just get that in a box, plug it in, and have a relatively easy time of getting that set up, even if I need to ask an assistant to do that for me, it's huge. And making sure everyone who's involved in this process knows that that Butler in a Box, I believe, costs somewhere upwards of $5,000 plus, and now we're getting things from a much lower price that can do quite a bit more. So the evolution is working, but just to be very mindful of all the implications of the technologies that we're developing.
Great. And Carissa, again, once again, if you could incorporate you're doing this with design and architecture for the needs that Thomas and Brook have so beautifully articulated here. So could you talk about it? And in your design, and accessibility and inclusivity is not limited to any one area either. So how do you do it in your work?
I think that something that comes to mind that is always like top of mind as we think that every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. So right now we're seeing that the power of people calling for change and identifying that there have been exclusions and things, and people being left out of really important conversations, and like Brook has called out, that policy as well. I think it's really important that we build diversity into every aspect of design and every aspect of inaccessibility too. And I think it's really important to, like, when we think about like how we're defining success and how we build that, it's really important to remember that, like, businesses are people. We are people designing them. We are people using them, using the technologies. And so if we really want to be inclusive and to make these solutions that are beneficial to everyone using these systems, that we need to be really cognizant of that, and also be aware too of just like when we have those mismatches, like the fault is on the system and not the person, because the person is excluded because of the system. So just being like incredibly cognizant of the fact that, for instance, like initial voice technology only worked on white men. men, and facial recognition, success was again on white faces. So just like being very cognizant of like, how do we measure success? How do we incorporate that data and feedback? And how do we be inclusive of that, whether it's, diversity in teams, which are proven to be more likely to check their own personal bias because of having diverse backgrounds to reference from. So I guess like, it's really important, like as we identify the fact that the fault lies with the systems and not the people that are being excluded, and that we need to be more inclusive of bringing people into those systems and reducing those barriers for all types of users, and especially making sure that something that Brook mentioned as well is making things affordable and economically accessible for people, so that technology is easy to be leveraged for people of all different socioeconomic considerations. I think that's really important to point out.
Excellent. Like I said, I feel like we could go on. I'm learning a lot just from monitoring this panel, and I've had the great opportunity to speak to the three of you on many instances. So just let's wrap up. I heard some great themes. We started with voice as an equalizer, but you brought up I think I like what Carissa said in her last point, that we need to build diversity into accessibility and include inclusivity. It's a very broad area. We want to make sure that we're addressing, everyone. There's no reason that technology should ever be a barrier. So let me ask each of you, if you could just spend a minute in closing, what is the message you would like to deliver to our audience who's gathered from around the world for this conference day and listening in on accessibility?
I will say, I'm going to kind of sneak in a couple different things. I will say, like, the importance of, again, nothing about them without them. Like, when you're bringing people in, don't design for them, design with them. And also just realize that, like, we as designers should be really good at taking feedback. It's okay to make mistakes. There's a lot of grace associated with that. That doesn't mean that you don't try. And again, like, just like the importance, again, of like this social movement of just like knowing that people are making this change in a very important and very meaningful way, and businesses and corporations will respond and be responsive to that, as well as the people within those. And so just, I think really, again, I think it's just like knowing that we have an incredible amount of work to do, but the impetus and the onus is on everybody, not just like me with a background in accessibility, or me as a designer, but we have a really important voice in the room in terms of like being able to bring other voices in the room and to help them be represented by the systems that we create. So I guess like the summation would be, nothing about them without them, and don't be afraid of taking criticism. Just keep moving, keep learning, keep growing.
Thank you so much. I love that. Nothing about them without them. It's fantastic. And don't design for them, design with them, and whoever that them might be. Brook, let me turn it to you.
Sure. I think just, I don't know, the overarching thought that would come to me is just that this right now is a time for listening, just to anyone who lives differently than you do, to seek out those perspectives and to do what you can to make sure you're supporting what you're hearing. Anything we can do to create lasting change and build up skills and the voices of others. I think you all have, like David mentioned, really unique perspective and abilities that can really elevate these conversations. And I also encourage you, if you have a tech product or idea that is going to increase equity or just support and include others that have diverse perspectives and needs, make it happen. Talk to people, push for it, advocate for it. It's not always going to be the money maker, but it's incredibly impactful. And I think, from everyone I've ever heard that is participating in some of these inclusionary developments, it's really fulfilling. And I can say personally that it can mean the world to people who are using them.
Thank you, Brook. I think, Brook, you brought up one of the key word I heard from what you said is it's about listening. It's about listening to perspectives and use cases that are different from your own, and incorporating those as much as possible and trying. So listening and trying. And I think that's a really nice balance when you correlate it with voice. So yes, we're working in the space of voice, but we need to listen. If you're going to be designing for voice, you have to have that capability to listen to those perspectives and those challenges that you yourself might not face or understand firsthand. Thomas, please, would you bring it home for us and tell us what would be your ask for the community?
So I think so. From listening to the two of you speak, I think I agree with you, especially with everything that's happening now. Awareness is key. We're here to educate. I mean, we're here to educate you. We're here to help you. And what's really important, I think, is to be aware of what's going on and don't lose that opportunity. If it's an increase in accessibility, there will also be an increase in access. So I think that's why we're here. We're here to help you. We're here to work with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carissa, Brooke, Thomas. It's been very informative. Thank you all around the world for listening. We look forward to your feedback. We look forward to pushing this conversation forward in both this forum and others, and with this forum and others. And we hope that you've learned something that will be valuable in the role you play in the voice community. Thank you so much.